Hey church, Pastor Shane here, another community group discussion starter video. This week we were in week 3 of Haggai, which means we were in chapter 2, and we read about the third message that Haggai brought to the people from the Lord. And this message was a little different than the other ones. In the first message, he was telling them to wake up, to make God a priority in their lives, and to go back and build the temple, and they did, and he encouraged them along the way. In the second message, they were discouraged about how the temple was being rebuilt, and so God encouraged them to kind of keep going and persevere, even though it wasn't what they expected, and that God would pick up and accomplish what they could not, and that his ultimate plan was to create a temple that was even better than the one they were building then, or even the grandest of the temple back in its day. And this week, he sent them a message to devote themselves. A message about purity. Basically, his message to them, using kind of some Old Testament illustrations, was that if their hands are impure and if their hearts are impure, then whatever they do with them will be impure as well. And they're building the temple, a place that's supposed to be holy and set apart and pure before the Lord. And so if they build a temple with impure hands, the temple is not going to make them holy by building it. The temple is not even going to help them follow and get closer to God if they're not doing it with hands and hearts that are clean and pure before the Lord. And so he just encourages them to continue to follow him even as he blesses them and makes their crops grow and brings them back into prosperity. And so it's a gracious acknowledgement of their following the Lord. It is an encouragement to be careful and attentive to their devotion to God into the future, and also a blessing. And we kind of focused in and talked about our life of worship. There's all sorts of stuff we could have talked about with this kind of passage. But since they're building the temple, the place of corporate worship in the Old Testament times, I thought it would be good for us to concentrate on worship, corporate worship. That means our Sunday morning gatherings in the same way. And applied that same lesson, that really it's our hearts, our minds, that make our worship service worshipful. It's not the music. It's not the aesthetics. It's not the style that ultimately matters. What makes a worship service worshipful is if our hearts are worshipful walking into that. If our desire is for God. And I think there's kind of the temptation in a very consumer-driven world for us as believers in Jesus Christ to say, okay, I've come to the worship service now, create the environment for me to worship. And that's, for each of us, we shouldn't be neglecting that responsibility. We shouldn't be putting that responsibility on the church, like, now you make me worship. I'm not saying that's our attitude, but it kind of can be in a sense if we're not like kind of watching after ourselves and really thinking about what we're doing. And while certainly our musicians and our worship leaders here, like their desire is to draw people in and to create an environment that's conducive to worship, that still for us individually, we all have to make that choice to come in and worship the Lord that week. That coming to the service doesn't make us holy, but if we come with holy hearts, then the service is glorifying to God. And I think it's just an encouragement and a reminder to us, because sometimes we could get caught up in the aesthetics of church, or be someone like me who has strong musical preferences. Listen, I really love some of our music, and some music I don't like as much. Some of us have preferences over the style. We have 2 styles here, contemporary or traditional, 2 different styles. As long as they're God-honoring, really the style doesn't matter. Now, there's nothing wrong with having that preference and desiring one style over another, or choosing to go to one service or other. That doesn't matter. But what does matter, the reminder we do need, is that what happens in the worship of the church is not what happens to us, is how we are engaging with the Lord, how we're devoting our minds and our hearts towards the Lord, how we're lifting up our voices in song. And so you're going to talk about all those things. You're going to talk a little bit about God's holiness, because that's what we're responding to. You're going to talk a little bit about your own holiness and kind of pursuing God in that, and talk a little bit about worship and the attitude of worship and what makes a worshiper and what makes a worship service. And by doing that, kind of is a reminder for us. At the start of the sermon, I talked about how baptism is kind of a landmark on the journey of faith. And that sometimes there's really clear landmarks in the journey of faith, and sometimes there's not as clear landmarks. And the beauty of our worship services is it's a constant reminder of us each and every Sunday to align our hearts and minds towards God. that whether we had a great week or a terrible week, that I could come there and praise them for who He is and what He has done for me. And that's going to look a little bit different every week. But if we go in with that attitude, there's a constant kind of moving us forward and along that journey of faith when we focus our attention on God and when we come with an attitude of worship to the service, not expecting the service to give us that attitude of worship. See how the connection there? I hope so. I hope I was clear this. And I hope you have a great discussion as well.